"You're a good guy, Jake." My girlfriend sat across from me and stirred her coffee. Then she added, "But honestly, I thought you'd be further along by now." I nodded. "Okay." 3 months later, she was sitting outside my apartment asking why I seemed completely different. The truth, I wasn't different. I just stopped trying to earn respect from someone who had already decided I wasn't enough. My name is Jake. I'm 34 years old. I manage operations for a regional warehouse company. I own a small townhouse, drive a paid-off truck, have retirement savings. No debt except my mortgage. Nothing flashy, nothing exciting, just stable. For most of my life, I thought stability was something to be proud of. When I met Vanessa, I thought she agreed. At first, she did. Or at least it seemed that way. We met through mutual friends, started dating a few months later. The relationship moved quickly. Within a year, we were discussing marriage, talking about buying a bigger house someday, building a future together, normal things. At least that's what I thought. Looking back, the warning signs appeared much earlier than I admitted. The first red flag was comparison. Vanessa compared everything: restaurants, vacations, jobs, cars, homes, people, especially people. Every conversation somehow became a ranking system. One evening, we attended a birthday party for one of her college friends. The friend had recently married a surgeon. On the drive home, Vanessa couldn't stop talking about it. "Their house is incredible." I nodded. "Yeah, and they're already looking at investment properties." "Good for them." She glanced at me, then sighed, a disappointed sigh. The kind that says more than words. I ignored it, like I ignored most things. The second red flag arrived through her best friend, Nicole. Nicole was obsessed with appearances. Salary, status, luxury, everything needed to look impressive. According to Nicole, success wasn't about being happy. It was about being envied. Every time Vanessa spent time with Nicole, she came home dissatisfied. Not with her life, with ours. One Friday night, we all had dinner together. Halfway through the meal, Nicole asked me what I did for work. I told her. She smiled politely, then asked, "And what's the long-term plan?" The question wasn't rude. The tone was. I answered anyway. Nicole nodded, then immediately started talking about someone else's boyfriend who had launched a tech company. The message was obvious, and Vanessa didn't challenge it. She agreed. That stayed with me, because silence is often agreement. The third red flag appeared gradually. Vanessa became increasingly focused on what other people had, not what we had, what everyone else had. If a friend bought a new car, she wanted one. If a coworker got promoted, she became frustrated. If someone posted vacation photos, suddenly our plans weren't good enough. Nothing ever lasted. Nothing ever satisfied her. There was always another comparison, another benchmark, another reason why life should be better. One evening we were discussing finances, normal conversation, future planning, saving, investments. Then Vanessa said something that bothered me. "You play it too safe." I looked up. "What does that mean?" "You never take risks." I laughed. "My mortgage would disagree." She didn't smile. "I'm serious." The conversation continued for another hour. By the end of it, I'd somehow become the problem, not because I was irresponsible, because I wasn't ambitious enough. That was the first time I heard the phrase, and it wouldn't be the last. Over the next several months, it appeared constantly. "You need bigger goals. You should make more money. You need to think bigger. You need to do more." The strange thing, none of these conversations involved actual solutions, just criticism, because criticism is easier than contribution, at least for some people. The next major warning sign arrived during a friend's engagement party. We were standing with a group discussing careers. One guy had recently sold his business. Everyone congratulated him. Normal conversation. Then Vanessa laughed and said, "Jake's happy being comfortable." The group laughed politely. I smiled. But something about the comment bothered me. Not because it was mean, because it was dismissive. Like everything I'd built somehow didn't count. Later that night, I mentioned it. Vanessa immediately became defensive. "Oh my God. What?" It was a joke. "Okay. Why are you so sensitive?" There it was. Another pattern. Every concern became an overreaction. Every feeling became evidence of a flaw. Eventually, I stopped bringing things up. Not because they didn't matter, because the conversations never went anywhere. Then came the promotion. A major promotion opportunity opened at my company. It would have required relocation, longer hours, more travel, more stress, considerably more money. I considered it seriously, for weeks, then declined. Not because I couldn't do the job, because I didn't want that life. I liked my life. I liked my balance, my family, my routine, my peace. When I told Vanessa, she stared at me like I'd confessed to a crime. You turned it down. Yeah. Why? I explained. She looked genuinely disappointed, not concerned, disappointed, as if I'd failed some kind of test. That conversation never really ended. It just evolved. Over the next few weeks, she brought it up repeatedly. Every disagreement somehow connected back to ambition, success, potential. Eventually, it became exhausting. Then came the night everything changed. The night that became the title of this story. We were having dinner at a restaurant. Nothing unusual, normal conversation. At least until Vanessa started talking about a coworker's boyfriend. Apparently he'd started a consulting business. Apparently it was growing rapidly. Apparently he was making incredible money. I listened quietly. Then she sighed, looked directly at me, and said, "Honestly, Jake, sometimes I wonder if you're just not successful enough for the future I want." The room suddenly felt very quiet, and for the first time, I stopped making excuses for her. For a few seconds after Vanessa said it, I just sat there. The restaurant noise faded into the background. People were talking. Servers were moving around. Music was playing. But all I could hear was one sentence. Maybe you're not successful enough for the future I want. Not because it was insulting, because it was revealing. For 2 years I'd been listening to little comments, little comparisons, little criticisms, and suddenly they all made sense. This wasn't about one promotion, one salary, one opportunity. This was about how she measured people, and apparently I wasn't scoring high enough. I looked at her and asked, "That's how you see me?" Immediately she sighed. The same sigh I'd heard 100 times before. "Oh my God. What? You're taking it the wrong way." I nodded slowly, because that answer was becoming predictable. Everything was always the wrong interpretation, never the wrong statement. We finished dinner, went home, and for the first time in a long time, I couldn't convince myself it was just a misunderstanding. The following week things got worse, not dramatically, gradually, the way most relationship problems actually happen. Vanessa started bringing up money constantly, not financial problems. Comparisons. Someone bought a new SUV. Someone upgraded houses. Someone invested in a startup. Someone doubled their income. Every conversation felt like a scoreboard, and somehow I was always losing. One evening she showed me pictures from Nicole's birthday party. Most of the photos were normal. Then she stopped on one. A luxury vacation. Private villa, ocean view, expensive everything. Nicole had posted it online. Vanessa stared at the photo for several seconds, then said, "This is the kind of life I want." I nodded. "Looks nice." She looked at me, then said, "Some people actually go after what they want." The implication wasn't subtle. I remember sitting there wondering how I'd become the villain for living a stable life. A life I'd worked hard to build. A life she'd happily enjoyed for 2 years. A few days later, another conflict appeared, this time involving her mother. Vanessa's mother had always liked me, or at least I thought she did. But recently her attitude had changed. Small comments, small observations, questions about my career, my plans, my income, nothing openly rude. Just enough to notice. One Sunday afternoon we had lunch together. At some point her mother smiled and said, "Vanessa always dreamed big." I nodded. "That's good." Then came the follow-up. "She needs someone equally ambitious." The table went silent. Vanessa didn't correct her, didn't disagree, didn't defend me. She simply looked down at her plate, and that told me everything. The criticism wasn't staying inside the relationship anymore. It was becoming a group project. The next major clue arrived through Nicole. Of course it did. Nicole seemed determined to make herself part of everything. One evening, Vanessa came home from dinner with her looking unusually irritated. I asked how her night went. Big mistake. Immediately she became defensive. "Why? No reason." "Seriously." I stared at her, confused again. The conversation spiraled quickly. Eventually she admitted Nicole thought she could do better, not in a cruel way, not according to Vanessa. Just honestly. That word made me laugh. Honestly. as if disrespect becomes acceptable when packaged as honesty. That night I barely slept, not because of Nicole. Nicole didn't matter, the problem was Vanessa. Because she kept bringing these people into our relationship, their opinions, their expectations, their comparisons, and somehow those opinions carried more weight than mine. That's when a realization started forming. The issue wasn't success. The issue was respect. If someone respects you, they don't constantly compare you to strangers. They don't publicly diminish your accomplishments. They don't make you compete against people who aren't even in the room. Over the next 2 weeks, I paid closer attention, and once I did, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Every accomplishment was minimized. Every positive thing became ordinary. Every sacrifice became expected. Nothing counted. Nothing lasted. Nothing was enough. One Friday evening, I finally tried to have a real conversation. Calm, respectful, direct, no accusations, no anger, just honesty. I told Vanessa how I felt, how the constant comparisons affected me, how dismissive some of her comments felt, how exhausting it was to keep proving myself. For a moment she listened, then came the response, the same response I'd been getting for months. "You've changed." I blinked. "What does that mean?" "You're insecure lately." There it was, again. Not accountability, deflection, not responsibility, blame. The problem wasn't what she said. The problem was my reaction to it, at least according to her. For nearly an hour the conversation went in circles. Every concern became a flaw. Every example became evidence that I was too sensitive. Eventually I stopped talking, not because she convinced me, because I realized something important. She wasn't listening. She was defending. There's a huge difference. The following week brought another emotional shift. For the first time, I stopped trying to convince her, stopped explaining, stopped defending my choices, and strangely enough, I felt lighter. That's when the relationship started changing. Not because Vanessa changed, because I did. The less I chased approval, the less control her criticism had, and she noticed. Immediately, one evening she asked, "Why are you being so distant?" I looked up from my laptop. "Distant?" "Yeah." I shrugged. "I've just been busy." The irony wasn't lost on me. For months I'd listened to explanations exactly like that. Now she didn't like hearing them. A few days later we had the conversation that ended everything, at least emotionally. We were sitting in the living room after dinner. The atmosphere felt tense, uncomfortable. Eventually Vanessa folded her arms, then delivered the sentence she'd probably been building toward for months. "If you're happy settling for less, maybe we're just not compatible." The room went quiet. A year earlier I would have argued, explained, defended myself, tried to prove my value. This time I simply nodded, then said, "Okay." The color drained from her face. And for the first time since this all started, Vanessa looked genuinely scared. When I said, "Okay," Vanessa looked like she just heard the wrong answer. For a few seconds she simply stared at me, waiting, expecting something else, an argument, a defense, a promise to do better. Instead she got silence. "What do you mean, okay?" I shrugged. "If that's how you feel." "That's not what I meant." I nodded. Maybe not, but it was what she'd said. And for the first time in our relationship, I wasn't interested in negotiating against my own self-respect. The conversation ended awkwardly. She went home. I stayed in my townhouse. And that night I slept better than I had in months, not because I was happy, because I was finally honest with myself. The next morning I realized something. For nearly 2 years I'd been treating Vanessa's approval like a moving finish line. Every time I got closer, she moved it again. More money, more ambition, more status, more achievement. There was always another requirement, another comparison, another reason I wasn't enough. And once I saw that pattern clearly, I couldn't unsee it. Over the next week, Vanessa's behavior changed. Quickly. Suddenly she wanted more communication, more attention, more reassurance. The same things she'd been withholding for months. She started calling more often, texting more frequently, checking in throughout the day. At first I thought it was coincidence. Then I realized what was actually happening. For the first time, I wasn't chasing, and that made her uncomfortable. One evening she texted, "What are you doing tonight?" I replied. "Having dinner with my brother." A minute later, "Where, then? How late, then? Who else is going?" I looked at my phone and laughed, not because it was funny, because for 2 years I'd been told those questions were unnecessary. Now she wanted answers. The difference? I wasn't upset. I simply answered politely, then went about my evening. That seemed to bother her more than if I'd ignored her. A few days later came karma wave one, the practical consequence. Vanessa had been assuming we'd move in together within the year, not officially planned, but expected. The kind of expectation that becomes real without anyone saying it out loud. One Saturday afternoon she brought it up. "So what are we doing about next year?" I looked up from my coffee. "What do you mean?" "The house." There was a long pause. Then I answered honestly, "I don't think that's happening." The color immediately left her face. "What?" "I don't think we should move in together." For the first time, reality entered the conversation, not emotions, reality. Because disrespect is easy when there are no consequences. The moment consequences appear, everything changes. The next week she called repeatedly, not angry, confused, almost panicked. Apparently she thought the conversation in my living room had been temporary, a phase, a mood, not a decision. But it wasn't a mood, it was clarity, and clarity tends to look permanent from the outside. Then came karma wave two, the social consequences. And like most real consequences, they happened naturally, not because I exposed Vanessa, because people notice patterns. Mutual friends started asking questions. Why were we spending less time together? Why had plans changed? Why did everything feel different? Eventually, the truth surfaced. Not the dramatic version, the real version. The version where Vanessa spent months comparing her boyfriend to other men. The version where nothing was ever enough. The version where appreciation slowly disappeared. The most surprising part, people didn't attack her. They simply stopped agreeing with her, even Nicole, which shocked me. Apparently, it's easy to encourage unrealistic expectations until those expectations destroy a relationship. Then suddenly, everyone becomes much more reasonable. One evening, my friend Marcus called. "You hear about Vanessa?" "No." "She got into a huge argument with Nicole." I sat back. "What happened?" Marcus laughed. "Nicole told her she pushed a good guy away." That sentence stayed with me because it perfectly summarized everything, not because I was perfect. I wasn't. Nobody is, but I had been consistent, reliable, supportive, and eventually Vanessa started treating those things as ordinary. Then came karma wave three, the emotional consequence, the hardest one. About 6 weeks later, Vanessa asked if we could meet. I agreed. We met at a small coffee shop we'd visited dozens of times before. The moment she sat down, I noticed something different. No confidence, no comparisons, no criticism, just sadness. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then she quietly asked, "Did you ever feel like I wasn't proud of you?" The question surprised me, not because it was difficult, because it was honest. I thought about it for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah." Tears immediately filled her eyes, not dramatic tears, not manipulative tears, the kind that come when someone finally sees something clearly. "I didn't mean to do that." "I know," and I believed her. That's the thing most people misunderstand. Vanessa wasn't a villain. She wasn't trying to destroy the relationship. She simply stopped appreciating it. One comparison at a time. One criticism at a time. One dismissive comment at a time. Until eventually the damage became permanent. For nearly an hour we talked, honestly, maybe more honestly than we ever had before. Eventually she admitted something, not about me, about herself. She'd become obsessed with appearances, success, status, what other people thought, what other people had, what other people achieved. And somewhere along the way she stopped appreciating what was already in front of her. Then she said something I'll never forget. "I thought you'd always keep trying." There it was, the truth. The same truth that exists in almost every failed relationship. She thought my patience was unlimited. She thought my understanding had no expiration date. She thought my loyalty guaranteed my presence. And eventually that certainty made her careless, because people stop protecting things they think they can't lose. A month later, we officially ended things. Quietly, respectfully. No screaming, no revenge, no dramatic confrontation, just acceptance. The relationship had already ended long before we admitted it. We were simply acknowledging reality. The year that followed became one of the most peaceful periods of my life. I focused on work, accepted a leadership role I'd previously ignored, started traveling more, spent more time with family, built stronger friendships. Most importantly, I stopped measuring myself through someone else's expectations. That changed everything. Almost a year later, I ran into Vanessa unexpectedly. We talked for a few minutes, nothing emotional, nothing dramatic, just two people catching up. Before leaving, she smiled sadly and said, "You know what's funny?" "What?" She shook her head. "I spent so much time worrying about finding someone more successful." I waited. Then she laughed softly. "I never stopped to ask whether I was losing someone who already made my life better." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then we wished each other well and went our separate ways. And as I walked away, I realized something. The relationship didn't end because Vanessa called me unsuccessful. It didn't end because of one comment, or one argument, or one bad night. It ended because of hundreds of small choices, hundreds of moments where appreciation was replaced by comparison, hundreds of times respect became conditional. That sentence didn't destroy the relationship. It simply exposed a problem that had been growing for a very long time. And once I finally saw it clearly, I stopped chasing. That's when everything changed.